So it's a pleasure to have you today. This is a very complicated continuity program. So I hope we can explain it to you so that you can understand. It basically gets to the edge of my comprehension, to be frank. But we have some wonderful experts that have been working on this very long, very hard. We've had new information Friday afternoon. So it's been evolving, and that doesn't make it simple. So allow me to introduce you to the people who have been so terrific behind this, in addition to all of you people who are very patient and the financial officers to whom this has added an enormous amount of work. So Nancy Ross and Chris Tinmouth have been co-chairs of the working group, and other members of that group that have provided really valuable input and guidance and templates are Olga Nyberger from the Office of Sponsored Research and Elvi Kalata from Financial Services. So welcome all. I'm going to turn this over to Nancy, who has bent her life around it for a number of weeks now. And she'll present some information and others can contribute to it. And I'll be watching the chat to make sure we get people's questions answered. So
Great.
Thank you for attending.
Well, thanks very much, Martha. And Brett, if you got the slides there, it really starts with slides because of the complexity of the program. I think it's really important to get through some of this in writing rather than just talking. So we have prepared some slides to go through. I'll be talking at you for probably about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. Also, during the slides.
No, I don't think so, Joe.
Okay, so I'm back, but Brett muted everybody else. Next slide, please, Brett. And then the next one, please. Okay, so the Canada Research, previous one, please. Back to the beginning. Great, perfect, thank you. So the Canada Research Continuity Emergency Fund is one of several federal grant relief programs. It's a budget of $450 million. It has a couple of objectives, and these are important to kind of set the context of what's to come in the next few slides. So this is the first objective of the program is emergency wage support. And many folks who are on the call today might have been involved in these first stages of the CRCEF around wage support for those of you who were paying folks like postdocs or technicians or students from research funds that were supported from industry or foundation sources or non-governmental sources. And that was the emergency wage support around the first stage of this program. You might recall that was around July, you would have heard from us, and then people were scrambling to try to do that accounting, which was due in August, back to the federal government to be able to get some of those wages and salaries recovered for folks who were unable to work during the shutdown. There's actually a stage 4 coming around this as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit. This was an unanticipated stage. It's basically an extension to that emergency wage support, but again, I'll talk about that in a minute. The second is support of extraordinary incremental costs associated with maintaining essential research-related commitments during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then ramping up to full research activities. So the words maintenance is going to come up a lot in my words over the next little bit, and ramp up, that's another term that's going to come up a lot because we're at the stage now where we're able to apply for relief for some of those extraordinary costs related to maintenance and ramp up. This is stage 3 of the CRCEF, and it's an envelope of $125 million. Now, CRCEF is the one federal grant relief program that's administered directly by universities, right? So instead of you talking directly to SSHRC or CIHR or NSERC, the university is talking directly to the federal government, and the federal government is supplying these funds to the university, who then administers it at the university. And the university also administers these funds on behalf of our 6 affiliated health research institutes. And so this is why it's kind of I guess, taking up a lot of our energies on campus is because we are actually doing the administration of this fund. Now, there's a little fine print at the bottom. It's not really fine print, but many of you will already be aware of some federal grant relief funding. There was an announcement back in April of $291.6 million, and that was for direct support to trainees through supplements to the Canada Graduate Scholarship. The Banting holders got direct money, and there was indirect support to research personnel through grant supplements from the tri-agencies, and you will have been directly in communication with the granting councils for those supplements. And that was generally for relief for expenses between April and June of this year. Next slide, Brett. Okay, so let's focus here in on the CRCEF itself. What was stage one? Stage one was that emergency wage support directed at research funds from non-governmental sources. It was 12 weeks of salary support, and there was an amount per week up to that amount of $847 per week. And it was provided that these folks who were being, whose wages and salaries were being asked for relief were not taking advantage of the CERB or any other federal employment relief programs. Stage two was residual need. So around the country, there was a reshuffling of some of that envelope for folks who had excess need from the original amount that they were allocated, and for other non-CALBO, university business office reporting institutions. So really stage two wasn't super relevant for McGill. But we're in stage three. This is very relevant for McGill, and this what we're talking about here is grant relief up to 75% of direct costs on research projects that were incurred between March the 15th and November the 15th. And these are costs that are associated with the maintenance of research and the ramp up of research activities. And so I'm talking a lot about that today, almost exclusively about stage three today. Is very relevant for the kinds of work and the kinds of expenses that were incurred at McGill. Stage four is actually an extension of stage one. We don't have the full details on stage four. Like I said, it was unanticipated. The program was never meant to have a fourth stage, but they are underspent on stages 1 and 2, and they're repackaging that up to extend the support that was given out on stage 1. So more details of this will come later. Next slide, please. So a couple of quick facts about the CRCEF. There's a notional allocation to McGill and its affiliates for stage 3 of $9.3 million. And this includes a residual amount from our stage 1 allocation. It's notional in the sense that we are instructed to account for all eligible needs, even if we exceed this amount. So even if McGill and its affiliates goes up beyond this, when we're looking at the types of eligible expenses, we're asked to account for the full need here. That's why it's really important for us to be talking to you today. It's really important for PIs to be thinking about the types of expenses that have been incurred on their research accounts since March the 15th. The other great thing about stage 3 is that it's a much broader set of eligibility in terms of source of funds than stage 1 was. So stage 1 was very targeted at industry and foundation sources. Stage 3, though, where we're at today, it's tri-agency funds are eligible, startup funds are eligible. This was something that many of our early career researchers were asking about early on in stage 1. And NIH funding is eligible, so it doesn't even have to be a Canadian source. And industry and foundation funds are also eligible at stage 3. So most of the types of grants that our McGill researchers hold are eligible to apply for grant relief at stage 3. Our reporting is due on the 15th. This is a new date that was issued last Friday. So you may have already been contacted by your faculty about CRCEF stage 3, and you probably were given a deadline that made you shudder because it was so quick, a turnaround. You can take a bit of a breath. We don't want to take our foot off the gas pedal here in terms of looking for eligible expenses, but the time frame is more reasonable now. Our reporting is due to the federal government on December the 15th, Of course, that means getting your expenses into your faculties earlier than that. So we bundle it all up and submit it to the federal government in the middle of December. So you'll be hearing soon, I would imagine, from your faculties about a revised deadline, but it really allows, and also still allows us to incur some expenses before November 15th if we need to. If folks are needing to incur eligible expenses, now would be the time to do so. And it allows us a little bit more breathing room in terms of reporting of actual expenses rather than projections of expenses. So that the change in deadline was very welcome news for us on Friday. Next slide, please. So I think this is the most important slide in the deck. So if you're maybe off somewhere else and you're just sort of half listening, you might want to just focus here, okay? This one is most important. This is the way in which we all judge eligibility at stage 3 expenses, and these are right from the CRCEF Q&A site. So what's eligible? So stage 3 eligible expenses are unanticipated and additional costs that would not have been incurred in the absence of the COVID-19 pandemic and cannot be funded by existing sources of funds. Secondly, these are eligible expenses are for direct costs associated with the maintenance and ramp up of research activities. These are costs borne by research projects, okay, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And they are approved by a decision-making body at the university. In the case of McGill, this is the McGill CRCEF steering committee, which is chaired by myself and made up of Associate Dean's Research and Human Resources and the finance side of the university. Next slide, please. So what are they getting at when they're talking about maintenance of research? This is quite important as you judge what's eligible, what you spent some of your research funding on between March 15th and November the 15th. So things like animal and specimen care throughout the crisis period, these are the words of the federal government. Maintenance of equipment, software cohorts, data sets, and warranties, service contracts that you may have had to pay for the year, but you weren't able to do research for part of that time. They can be prorated for the period which they were not, which research was not active. Technological equipment for remote access to maintain assets, and safety equipment for personnel dedicated to maintenance. These are all eligible, they're all extraordinary, and they're all able to be applied for recovery through CRCEF stage 3. Next slide, please. What do they mean by ramp up? What are they getting at there? So if you had to reorganize your research environment over the period, if there was extra cleaning that needed to be done, if you purchased disinfectants, if you had to make on-site furniture modifications, these are the types of things that would have been incurred extraordinarily to reorganize your research environment over that period. If there's additional costs that you had to incur to restore your research to pre-pandemic levels, so if you had an experiment that you had to ramp back up, if you had to bring an animal population back to its state before the pandemic, if you had to restart the collection for data or rebuild data sets to their pre-pandemic levels, all of these would be eligible expenses. User fees charged by shared platforms, research facilities, these are eligible. If there was rescheduling costs for human or clinical trials, extra staffing that had to go on to get a trial back up and running, these would be eligible expenses. Any extra workshops that had to be done to shift your folks to online research, for example, these would be eligible expenses. Reassembly of safety checks, reacquiring lost and donated lab supplies. So many labs across many universities donated some of their PPE. These are all now, if you want to repurchase this and replenish your supplies, you can do so and apply for relief through CRCEF stage 3. And if you acquired PPE, for example, for research personnel, and by research personnel, we mean postdocs, undergrads, graduate students, or technicians that are paid through research grants. So that's the kinds of things they're getting at when they say a ramp up of research. Next slide, Brett, please. So a couple of things have come up around eligibility and some tightening up of the sort of, but clarification of eligibility has come up since last week, and I'll speak to two of these most important ones. The first is a question about, well, what about internet connection or landline or cell phone connections and equipment for working remotely? So the statement from the federal government has been that these expenses can be eligible if they meet the stage 3 eligibility criteria. So remember that slide that I said was the most important. So go through that and think about it. These are incremental expenses only, right? So if you had, if you were working remotely and you had unlimited data and high speed in February, and you didn't have to incur anything additionally, you would not be able to claim that internet expense on the CRCEF stage 3. If, however, you had to set up graduate students who couldn't connect remotely to research group meetings, for example, the incremental expense for their upgraded internet could be eligible, okay? So these things, again, we really just learned about the clarification here, but this is a bit of a change for what we were messaging at the beginning. Keep in mind, however, that we are still waiting for the Canada Revenue Agency to clarify its position on what's called the T2200, which is a form that employers may issue to employees who have to work from home, so that they can claim their home-based remote work expenses on their personal income taxes. If, and we expect this to be the case, and Chris, you could chime in here if you'd like, that university employees will be issued T2200s, these will certainly be more advantageous from a personal point of view in terms of
Chris, in Nancy's absence here, because we've lost Nancy, do you want to take over going through these PowerPoints?
Okay, sorry about that. I was on mute. So I think Nancy was okay. So I think we talked about the internet connection, landlines, cell phones, etc. So if it is an incremental charge, can you submit it as an eligible expense? We are still looking at issuing the T2200s. So that's to allow any employee to claim work from home expenses against their personal tax return, taxable income, which will be way more advantageous to you because it's a deduction in arriving at your taxable income. So Nancy is back, so I will let her carry on.
Yeah, I don't even know where I went there from, but I am still here.
Into cyberspace somewhere.
Yeah, clearly, that was weird. But back, thanks, Chris, for that clarification. So I think it's just thinking about whether you really want these funds to be brought back to your research grant, your research project, or to on a personal level. So that's something that individual researchers really need to decide. Salary cost question was so confusing from day one, and they finally provided clarity on this as of last Friday. So I'm going to read exactly what they told us, which is the costs of research personnel can be eligible for partial reimbursement at up to 75% in stage 3 for the period of August 30th to November the 15th, provided the costs meet stage 3 eligibility criteria. Okay. So looking back again to those stage 3 eligibility criteria, the cost of research personnel, by that we mean graduate students, undergraduate students, postdocs, technicians, may be eligible for partial reimbursement. You'll note that the window is very different than what you would have seen up until now for any of the supplements from the tri-agencies. They're really targeting the period August to November because that period is relatively untouched by any other grant relief programs. And so you'd have to sort of think, are the folks that are the research personnel that you've been paying during this period, are they involved in the maintenance and ramp up of research? And are these extraordinary salary costs during the period? So we ask that you weigh that out when you're thinking about eligibility for those folks. Next slide. Is my tri-agency fund eligible? This is welcome news. Yes, particularly for those tri-agency projects that have time-only extensions. So many people hold tri-agency funds at McGill with a time-only extension and didn't receive any other type of federal grant relief program. The CRCEF Stage 3 is a pot of money that you can apply for, especially if your tri-agency project has a time-only extension. And laterally, if the project has been extended with funding and there was salary support received to date for that fund, you just can't have that research personnel receive funding for the same period of time. So you can't have a sort of a double dip, if you like, of the salary claim for the same time period. The same individual can have their salary supported by two different programs. It cannot overlap on the time frame. Okay, I hope that clarifies for folks. Next slide, please. So the question also has come up many times since the beginning of the announcement of CRCEF. What if eligible research, maintenance, and ramp-up expenses were paid for by my department or by my faculty or another unit at McGill and not expensed through my research funds? So the government clarified that these may be claimed on CRCEF Stage 3, but they've asked for two things. They've asked that if these expenses were incurred by faculties, departments, by the university, that these expenses be communicated to the PIs and that these expenses are traceable through an invoicing process. Okay, sounds like a bit of an accounting nightmare, but it's not terrible. So what does it mean for you as a PI? So PIs may receive what have been bandied around the country now, I guess at the U15 and other areas. You may receive a notional invoice, okay? It's notional in the sense that it distributes costs amongst research projects that benefited from the eligible expense. It's important to know here, though, that money is not changing hands, that ledgers aren't being emptied and filled up again, but rather the costs are being distributed amongst the folks who benefited from the expenditure that happened at a unit level that's beyond the research account. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, and there may be some questions about this. So you have to have been informed about this. So our obligation is to inform PIs about this, and the costs have to be traceable back to research projects. That's a fundamental criterion of the CRCEF program. Next slide, please. What's not eligible? What's not eligible is ramp down costs. And where I've seen this now state through questions is if someone had a non-refundable travel expense or cancellation fees, these are considered ramp down costs and are not eligible to be recovered through CRCEF Stage 3. Losses or spoilage are not eligible. So if you lost animal, if you lost some other materials that spoiled during the period, the loss is not an eligible expense, but the recovery of that is. So if you replace it, you can expense that. So that's a really important thing to note. You can't sort of claim the replacement, but also claim the loss. You're really claiming the replacement of those materials. CRCEF. Next slide, please. So our process at the university, just to let you know what's going on in the background here, is to follow this sort of top-down and bottom-up approach we've been using since Stage 1 of the announcement of CRCEF. By top-down, we mean that we are producing central financial reports that help to pre-populate and jumpstart the process of making the claims against the CRCEF. And we also will be inviting researchers through open calls who have thought about their expenses over the period of March 15th to November 15th and are making a case for a claim against stage 3 CRCEF. So this top-down approach, you may have already experienced it so far at McGill, because what was done at the RFMS, the Research Financial Management Services team, was they produced these reports for individual PIs who had expenses that used the COVID activity code during the eligibility period. So basically March 15th up until present day. These researchers are already receiving a pre-populated template that can also have additional items added to it that weren't pre-populated. We know very well that many researchers incurred lots of expenses during this period that are eligible, that do relate to maintenance and ramp up of research, that would not have used the COVID activity code. So by all means, if you've received one of these templates with pre-populated expenses, by all means, that's not the end of the line. You should think about the other eligible expenses that you may want to add to this pre-populated template. Open calls are coming. They're coming shortly. PIs will be asked to complete a similar template describing the need and of the expense, and to work with their local finance officers to estimate their claim. And the last point I would make here is reach out to the faculty financial officer. Those names are all on the CRCEF McGill website. If you don't know who your FFO is, you can see who that is on the website. Also, you probably already know your FST locally in your department. Those folks know what's going on here as well and can help you, right? So reach out, reach out, reach out. Next slide, please. Just from sort of behind the scenes, quick facts about the CRCEF and McGill. There's a working group.
Okay, so maybe I'll take over. I think Nancy's frozen again. So we just wanted to give you an idea of, you know, the numbers game with the CRCEF. So we have one working group, which Martha introduced at the beginning. We have a steerco, which Nancy spoke to during her presentation. We have our 10 faculty financial officers who are very much involved. We have 54 financial service teams, and in the Faculty of Medicine Admin Excellence Centers. We have actually created 428 reports for the PIs that have been distributed. And to date, we have touched upon 627 research funds that have incurred some COVID-related expenses based on the coding that is in Banner right now.
Right, so I'm back.
So I went through this slide, Nancy.
Okay, thanks a lot. So lots of funds implicated. That's just to date. This is not every fund.
Exactly.
So there's just some numbers behind CRCEF to date. So maybe a last slide. I think it's the last slide. Brett, thanks.
Yeah.
So questions and support. So the McGill template for accounting has been finalized. It may be shifted a little bit based on the information we got on Friday. And the affiliates, if folks are from the affiliated health research institutes, can access this if they should like. The notional invoicing template is being finalized, and we can share this for units if they need. Updates are being put directly on the McGill CRCEF website. There's a stage 3 tab, and then there's a stage 3 updates tab. As we get updates, this is being filled in on the website as quickly as we get the information. So that's a very good up-to-date source of eligibility or instructions. There's a dedicated information email, crcef_info.osr@mcgill.ca. This is checked regularly. If you have any question about very specific or general, they can be directed there, but also reach out to your local finance people. You can also reach out directly to me or Chris about any questions about CRCEF. So,
Nancy, there's a set of questions that maybe we can ripple through right now that have been repeated. So one of them is about core facilities and the loss of user fees for those facilities.
Yeah, so absolutely eligible here. So the expense will be that the core facility would have kept going, but the user fees would have dried up to support that. And so there will need to be some notional invoicing around there to spread some of the costs of those cores across the traditional user group that would have been supporting the facility if it were normal times. So the facilities who normally run on user fees, and if these user fees slowed or dried during the period, this is a unit that's beyond a regular research account that incurred expenses that benefited others. And so we would use a notional invoicing structure for those folks.
Another question was about students who are out of the country. Can their salaries be claimed as personnel?
So it's really important to go back to the eligibility criteria and look through that. This is about the expenses related to maintenance and ramp up of research. If that student was paid through a tri-agency account and received the supplement that may have gotten them through, if, however, their activities relate to the maintenance and ramp up of research, they could be eligible. I don't believe that if they're being paid, if they're being expensed through a research account, and the activities relate to maintenance and ramp up of research, those would meet the eligibility criteria. Because remember, the student's not being paid back here, right? The fund is being paid back. It's the PI's fund that's being paid back. So whether the research personnel are located here in Montreal or elsewhere is not as material as to whether or not they meet the eligibility criteria as set out in that slide earlier on.
Okay, so once again, I think people need a repeat about the salary for people who were paid part of their salary out of the 291 funds that say were CIHR supported.
Yeah, so what the clarification has been is that, let's say you heard from the CIHR that you got your supplement and that you claimed wages, salary, stipends for a postdoc early on in the COVID pandemic, likely up until the end of June. Okay, so if that postdoc or graduate student was involved in the maintenance or ramp up of research activities, their salary may be eligible on CRCEF stage 3, provided that their salary support is not been covered for the same period of time. In other words, I don't even think this is an issue for anybody, actually. They've made this statement. I don't think there can be an overlap. And most of the supplements were directed up until the end of June. So there can be, these salaries may be eligible if they meet the criteria, because I doubt very much that anybody has an overlap of the period for the supplement and for the stage 3 CRCEF.
There's a question about CFI funds, time-only extension funds. Are they eligible?
I'm not 1,000% sure on CFI right now. They were definitely not eligible at stage 1. I think if they've been, so you're saying it's a time-only extension? Yeah, let me get back on that one just to be absolutely certain. CFI has been sort of off the radar of this fund since the beginning for lots of reasons. And on this point, I'd really like clarification. So I'll be back to that person about that one.
Okay, I think we've repeated enough about the deadlines. The deadlines did change for McGill to December 15th, but we will be looking for information long before that so we can package it together, and your faculties will be letting you know when your Excel spreadsheet deadline is. This deadline extension came through to the university on Friday afternoon.
Yeah, so it's quite likely, well, it's certain that the faculties who have been communicating with you, your faculty, finance officers, and teams who've been communicating with you have not communicated to you that this change happened. So, and I know the deadlines were really short, and these things will get a little bit easier for everybody because our own deadline is now December the 15th.
And people want to know about where they can find things, the Excel sheet, and there was another question about being able to find information about cores.
Well, so there are 428 PIs who will have in the process or have already received that Excel sheet. The open calls through the faculties are still trickling out. So many people, there should not be a PI at McGill who doesn't get this Excel sheet in their inbox in the coming days or so. So through an open call. So it's being done through the faculty finance teams. Chris, do you want to chime in on any of that and then on the timing of that?
Right, so they have been distributed, and the ones that have been distributed are the ones that actually use the COVID activity code. So it is possible that some PIs have not received a template and do have eligible expenses because they have not used the COVID activity code. So we are meeting with the faculty financial officers on Thursday, and to answer their questions and whatnot. And we will provide them with a blank template to distribute to those who have not received a pre-populated template.
Yes, thank you. Very nice, clear, thank you.
Is there somebody at RI that I should contact to get this kind of spreadsheet?
So I think we've given them a copy of the template, but we haven't pre-populated it because you're not in our accounting system. But I would contact Cynthia Raponi. You're on mute.
How much justification needs to be introduced into these spreadsheets?
So I think Cynthia will go through that with you. It's just all the different types of expenses that Nancy has gone through in the presentation.
Okay, and this presentation, because I was late.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
So is this presentation recorded so I can access it again?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for thinking about that. Okay.
Okay, there are questions about the templates, whether they're going to come pre-populated.
Right, so just they will be pre-populated if you use the COVID activity code for expenses, so that if you are a PI who holds a research fund who used the COVID activity code during the period March the 15th to present, you will receive a pre-populated template with expenses that you can add to. If you did not use that code, the financial system can't find your eligible expenses. So you will be invited to fill out a template basically from scratch.
There are a couple of things in here that are about different subject matter, but they all relate to being something that, how should we go about research-related commitments that were charged fully prior to March 2020 and will need to be extended post-November 2020? There's a certain database is one question. Somebody else has a question related to a student.
Well, I would say that this is a temporary fund. So CRCEF is going to be kind of finished as of March, right? And the eligibility window, I think, is very inflexible on CRCEF. So the expenses, the only way to retrieve the expenses or recover the expenses is to incur them during the eligibility window. So it's very much so that the expense happened between March 15th and November the 15th in order to be recoverable. If there's no expense from a research account, we can't claim it back. So it's very important that those expenses have been incurred on that eligibility window. Is that answering the question?
Well, the student one is perhaps a little bit different, but that answered it for me. Person had to pay an expensive one-way emergency ticket for visiting international student to return home during the shutdown. Not sure it'll be able to resume research given that it's fieldwork based. We can only ramp up next summer, the summer of 2022. Would this expense be eligible or not because it's considered a ramp down?
Yeah, most of those kinds of things are ramped down and would not be eligible.
I have a question concerning salaries of
Yeah, we're
students.
going to ask you to put it in a chat if you don't mind, okay?
Okay, so chat, okay, here.
So, sorry, I just want to
Hey.
correct something for the RI. I think I did mention that the template will not be pre-populated for the RI because you're not using our accounting system and you do not have the COVID activity code. So you will have to populate the template yourself. And I thought it was Cynthia, but it's Susan James you should be contacting, not Cynthia Raponi for the RI.
Okay, and then we have a question from Sherry about details of the notional invoices. Will they be explained to the FFOs at the meeting this week?
Absolutely, that is definitely the one of our first topics on our agenda, the notional invoice, yes. Yeah.
Yep, it's hard to incur fieldwork research related expenses. Does anybody have any insight into that?
I know the fieldwork stuff was shut down. People couldn't travel, couldn't incur those expenses over the period. And really, we really are limited to those expenses that were incurred at between March the 15th and November the 15th. So I know it's tough. Presumably some of those expenses actually weren't incurred, right? So, or still in your funds to keep going. It's maybe small consolation, but it really is very important, or as eligibility criteria, that expenses were incurred during that window.
People in the RIs, it looks like you need to connect with your finance teams for templates. Are there other questions? Okay, I don't see any on the chat that, unless I'm missing something.
I think there's just a question about salaries, working and core facilities. So if there were expenses incurred by core facilities to maintain or ramp up research, these may be recoverable at stage 3 CRCEF. And this is new really as of Friday in terms of the statement on salaries. So it may be why you haven't gotten wind of it yet. So yes, and those will have to be notionally invoiced across research accounts.
Anybody else?
Maybe I can just say, if people think of questions once the session is done, we remain available. You have our contact at the on the last page of the presentation, as well the site to ask questions, which we are looking at on a daily basis.
Okay, well, I can't thank this team that has worked on this enough. It's been a very complicated program. It's made more complicated by getting information in an evolving fashion, and particularly late on a Friday before a Thanksgiving weekend. So the good news is we have a little bit more time to cope with this. And I would say, from the council point of view, from a meeting I was at, they did feel a little bit constrained as councils, in that a number of things were decisions that ISED and finance came up with in Ottawa, and perhaps didn't have, those groups don't perhaps have as close and working relationship and information about the university environment. So it hasn't been unfrustrating from the administrators in Ottawa, who happen to be located at SHRC, to get all the signals and criteria straight for this. Okay, and we've got the where the presentation will be. There is somebody who's concerned still about a salary issue there that I think got an answer.
Right, Basically, again, the salary issues are really if the salary has been expended during the period for salaries, it is actually August the 30th to November the 15th for ramp up or maintenance. It is eligible under CRCEF stage 3.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, but I don't believe the 847 per week is still applicable as it was under stage 1. So stage 3 is open game in terms of eligible salaries.
Up to 75% though.
Yeah.
So yes, not constrained by the weekly amount.
Salaries for only after August 30th, not during the summer. That's
Nope.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, after August 30th. Okay, last chance for questions here. We have a little bit more time. Yeah, so for the cores, it's important to know if the CFI IOF funds can be reimbursed. So that's the question we need to look into and get back to.
Yeah, we'll certainly look into that and get back and get a firm answer on that.
So people in cores still wanting to make sure they know how to proceed. So could they have a special information sheet on how this would work? And then, so presumably we can provide some extra core information. And then how about CRC secondary? So Carolyn, I'm not sure what you mean by secondary.
So do you mean the research component of a CRC chair? This would be an eligible type of fund that you may have incurred expenses on. Yeah, assigned to the research costs that you would, the research fund that comes along with your CRC would be an eligible fund to claim expenses against for CRCEF stage 3, provided they meet the eligibility criteria. The fund is fine.
Okay, and we'll send a note out to everyone, letting them know that the presentation's online.
Yeah.
One more clarification, is there a salary that had not been covered by the previous research personnel supplement? Could it be eligible from July instead of August? It is for new ramp-up role. And we claim their entire contract or only as of the August date mentioned for salaries?
Our information is August 30th to November the 15th.
Anything else? Okay, so we need information about CFI. We need perhaps some clarification on how to proceed for the core, so that they know what they can do. And people in RIs, go back to your own financial services. They will have any kinds of sheets they need you to fill up and procedures.
Thanks everybody for your questions.
Okay, it looks like we've come to the end of the questions. Thank you all for attending, and thank you all for the questions. They help us to keep figuring this one out, and it isn't simple. Someday when we all grow up, we have to help Ottawa think of new and acronyms that are pronounceable and not repeats of all the same letters over and over again. There's been a lot of confusion between CRCEF and CRCEF, as I call it. Okay, thanks all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye everybody.